Elijah Kendall stood in the hospital parking lot at 6 in the morning, watching his breath fog in the October air. His 2001 Chevy pickup idled behind him, the engine's familiar rumble the only sound cutting through the silence. The phone pressed against his ear felt cold as concrete. "I don't care what Dad wanted, Uncle Ray. I need that money now." The voice on the other end crackled with static and 40 years of cigarettes. "That land's been in our family since before I was born, I know, but Marla's dying and experimental treatments don't take insurance." Elijah's free hand gripped the truck's tailgate. 48,000. That's what they're offering. Eli, you can't just... I already signed the papers. The silence stretched long enough for Elijah to wonder if the call had dropped. Then his uncle's heavy sigh came through the speaker. "Your father's rolling in his grave. My father never had to watch cancer eat his wife alive." Elijah ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. Through the hospital's glass doors, he could see Marla in the wheelchair, Eva holding her hand while Travis pushed from behind. His wife looked smaller than she had 3 months ago, her face gaunt beneath the colorful headscarf Eva had bought her. The oncologist had used words like aggressive and stage 3 and limited options, but Dr. Patterson at Philadelphia Methodist had mentioned something else, a new immunotherapy protocol showing promise in early trials. Not covered by insurance. $47,000. Elijah had the land sale money. He'd cashed out his pension early, taking the penalty. He'd maxed out 3 credit cards. The numbers added up barely. "Dad," Travis's voice carried across the parking lot. At 19, he had Elijah's build and Marla's eyes. "Mom's ready." Elijah walked over and took the wheelchair handles from his son. Marla's hand found his as he bent to adjust the footrests. "You sure about this?" she whispered. Her voice had grown thin over the past weeks. "We're going to beat this thing." He kissed the top of her head where her hair used to be. "All of us." The drive to Philadelphia took 90 minutes. Marla dozed in the passenger seat while Eva read treatment pamphlets in the back. Travis had stayed home. Someone needed to handle the calls from medical billing offices. Dr. Patterson's office overlooked the Schuylkill River. The treatment itself was surprisingly mundane. An IV drip in a comfortable chair, monitors beeping softly. Marla held Elijah's hand for the first hour, then fell asleep. "The response rates are encouraging," Dr. Patterson told Elijah during one of their consultations. 60% see tumor reduction within 6 months. And the other 40%? We try something else. The treatment stretched through winter and into spring. Every 2 weeks, the drive to Philadelphia. Every 2 weeks, Elijah watched $47,000 disappear into hope. Marla's appetite improved first, then her energy. By March, she was walking around the block. By April, she was back to arguing with Eva about curfew. The scans in May showed what they all wanted to see. Clear margins, no detectable tumors, remission. "We did it," Marla said in the parking lot afterward, tears streaming down her face. "We actually did it." Elijah held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the same one she'd used for 15 years. Real hair was starting to grow back beneath the scarves. "Yeah," he said, "we did." But something had changed during those months of treatment. Marla seemed distant, distracted. She blamed it on post-treatment depression, a common side effect the doctors had warned about. She started staying late at work, taking calls in the other room, responding to texts with quick glances and careful angles. "She's adjusting," Ava said when Elijah mentioned his concerns. "Give her time, Dad. She almost died." The note arrived on a Tuesday in June. Elijah found it tucked under his windshield wiper after teaching his afternoon class at the community college. Plain white paper, block letters in black ink. "Better watch your back. She's not sick anymore." He read it twice, then crumpled it into his pocket. Anonymous notes were cowards' tools, but they usually came from somewhere real. That evening, Marla worked late again. She'd been putting in extra hours at the insurance company, trying to catch up after months of medical leave. At least that's what she told him. "How was work?" Elijah asked when she came home at 9:30. "Busy. Claims are backing up." She kicked off her shoes and headed for the kitchen. "Did you eat?" "Travis made sandwiches." She nodded and opened the refrigerator, her back to him. "I might be late again tomorrow. Big case review." Elijah watched her pour a glass of wine. Her hands were steady, her voice casual. But she hadn't looked at him once since walking through the door. The investigation started small. Elijah wasn't a suspicious man by nature, but he'd learned to pay attention to details. 20 years of fixing appliances had taught him that problems usually announced themselves in subtle ways before they became disasters. Marla's phone habits had changed. She'd started charging it in the bathroom instead of on her nightstand. She took it with her everywhere, even to get the mail. When it buzzed during dinner, she'd glance at it with the same careful expression she used when reviewing insurance claims. "Who keeps texting you?" Eva asked one evening. "Work stuff. You know how it is." But Eva didn't know how it was, because she was 17 and worked part-time at a local bookstore. Travis might have known, but he was too focused on his mechanical engineering classes to notice family dynamics. Elijah started paying closer attention. Marla's schedule had become erratic in ways that didn't match her previous patterns. She'd worked at the same insurance company for 12 years, handling medical claims. She knew her job well enough to manage her time efficiently. The sudden need for constant overtime didn't add up. "Mom's acting weird," Travis said one evening while they worked on his truck in the garage. "How so?" "She used to ask about school, my classes. Now she just nods and changes the subject." Travis wiped his hands on a shop rag. "And she keeps getting phone calls when Eva's not around." "What kind of phone calls?" "I don't know. She takes them outside or in the bedroom with the door closed." Elijah tightened a bolt on the alternator bracket. The note in his pocket had been there for 3 days now, crumpled and reread. "Better watch your back." The breakthrough came by accident. Travis had borrowed Marla's car to run errands while his truck was getting inspected. He found the phone while looking for a pen in the glove compartment. "Dad, you need to see this." The phone was a cheap flip model, the kind sold at gas stations for cash. Travis held it like it might explode. It was hidden under the registration papers. Why would Mom have a second phone? Elijah took the device and scrolled through the call log. The same number appeared repeatedly, starting 3 months ago, right around the time Marla had started feeling better. "Don't tell your sister about this," Elijah said. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out what's going on." The number belonged to Neil Withers, according to a reverse lookup search Elijah ran at the college computer lab. Neil worked in compliance at the same company as Marla. Divorced, 45 years old, 2 kids from his first marriage. Elijah drove past Neil's apartment complex on his way home from work. A modest place in the next town over, the kind of development built in the 70s and showing its age. Neil's car was in the parking lot, a silver Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. The pieces were falling into place in ways that made Elijah's stomach turn. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the distance that had grown between them even as Marla's health improved. He'd spent their savings, their future, every asset they had to save her life. And she'd spent her recovery falling for someone else. But suspicion wasn't proof. Elijah needed more than a burner phone and a schedule that didn't add up. He needed documentation, evidence that would hold up in family court. Pennsylvania was a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity still mattered when it came to asset division and custody arrangements. The surveillance started simply. Elijah began paying attention to patterns, documenting times and dates. When Marla said she was working late, he'd drive past her office building. When she claimed to be having dinner with her friend Darcy, he'd check Darcy's social media posts. The lies were consistent but not clever. Marla wasn't a natural deceiver, which made her attempts almost insulting in their transparency. "I'm worried about your mother," Elijah told Travis one evening after Marla had left for another supposed work meeting. "She seems happier lately." "Does she?" Travis considered this. "Yeah, actually, like she's been humming in the kitchen. And she bought new clothes last week." New clothes. Elijah had noticed that too. Marla had replaced her practical work wardrobe with outfits that were more fitted, more colorful. She'd started wearing makeup again, doing her hair in styles she hadn't tried since before Eva was born. "She's probably just glad to be healthy," Travis said. Probably, but Elijah knew better. Marla was dressing for someone. The question was whether that someone was worth destroying their family. The confrontation at the park happened by accident, or so it seemed. Elijah had taken Eva to the community barbecue, one of those end-of-summer events the town organized every year. Marla had begged off, claiming a headache. Eva spent most of the afternoon with her friends, leaving Elijah to man the grill and make small talk with neighbors. He was flipping burgers when she approached with her arms crossed, and her expression set in that particular way that meant trouble. "Why are you being so cold to Mom?" Eva demanded. "I'm not being cold. You barely talk to her anymore. She asks you questions and you give her these one-word answers." Eva's voice was rising, drawing attention from nearby families. "She almost died, Dad. She's trying to get back to normal and you're acting like she did something wrong." Before Elijah could respond, a familiar voice interrupted. "Everything okay here?" Neil Withers stood behind them, holding a plate of potato salad and wearing a concerned expression. He was taller than Elijah had expected, with graying hair and the kind of confidence that came from believing his own lies. Just a family discussion, Elijah said evenly. Neil, Ava's face brightened. I didn't know you were coming. Wouldn't miss it. Best barbecue in the county. Neil smiled at Eva, then extended his hand to Elijah. We haven't met. Neil Withers. I work with Marla. Elijah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. Neil was good at this, probably had plenty of practice from his first divorce. Elijah Kendall. Marla talks about you all the time. Says you're quite the mechanic. Appliance repair mostly, some automotive work on the side. That's a useful skill. I can barely change my own oil. Neil laughed, a sound that seemed calculated to put everyone at ease. Is Marla here? I thought I might see her. Headache, Eva said before Elijah could respond. She's been getting them since the treatments ended. Poor thing. The post-treatment adjustment can be rough. Neil's concern seemed genuine, which made it worse somehow. Tell her I hope she feels better. As Neil walked away, Eva turned back to her father. See, that's how normal people act. Concerned, supportive. Maybe you could try it sometime. Elijah watched Neil rejoin a group of people near the pavilion. The man moved easily through the crowd, shaking hands and making conversation. He was probably popular at work, the kind of guy who remembered birthdays and organized office parties, the kind of guy who'd seem like a breath of fresh air to a woman who'd spent 6 months thinking she was going to die. That evening, Elijah installed a voice recorder in Marla's car. The device was smaller than a matchbook, designed for security professionals and suspicious spouses. He tucked it under the driver's seat, connected to the car's electrical system. The recording started the next day. Most of it was mundane. Radio music, phone calls with Eva about school, conversations with drive-through attendants. But on Thursday evening, while Elijah was teaching his night class, Marla made a call that changed everything. I can't keep doing this, Marla's voice came through the tiny speaker in Elijah's garage. Lying to everyone, sneaking around, it's eliminating me. Neil's response was muffled, coming through the car speakers. I know it's hard, but you don't know. You've never been married to someone for 20 years. You don't understand what it's like to throw away everything you've built. Marla, listen to me. You almost died. You're allowed to want something for yourself. I didn't think I'd survive the treatments. I thought this was my last chance to feel something real before I died. But I'm not dying anymore, Neil. I'm just cheating. It's not cheating. It's living. When you were sick, did Elijah make you feel beautiful? Did he make you feel like a woman instead of a patient? A long pause. Then Marla's voice, softer. No, he didn't. I rest my case. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, but Elijah had heard enough. He sat in the garage, staring at the device, processing what he'd learned. Marla had started the affair because she thought she was dying. She'd wanted to feel desired, appreciated, seen as something other than a medical case to be managed. Part of him understood that. The rational part that had watched her waste away during chemotherapy, that had seen her stare at herself in the mirror with haunted eyes. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness. Not when she'd continued the affair after remission. Not when she was lying to their children, to her family, to everyone who'd supported them through the worst year of their lives. Elijah ejected the memory card and slipped it into his wallet. Then he made a phone call to Stuart Michaels, the best divorce attorney in 3 counties. The strategy session took place the following Monday morning in Stuart's office above the hardware store downtown. The lawyer was younger than Elijah had expected, maybe 35, but he had a reputation for methodical preparation and ruthless execution. The good news is Pennsylvania allows fault-based divorce for infidelity, Stuart said, reviewing the documents Elijah had prepared. The bad news is proving infidelity isn't enough by itself. We need to demonstrate financial misconduct or show that the affair affected the children's well-being. What kind of financial misconduct? Spending marital assets on the affair, gifts, trips, hotel rooms. Also, if she's given him access to joint accounts or shared financial information, that could be a problem. Elijah thought about the credit cards he'd maxed out for Marla's treatments, the pension he'd cashed early. I spent everything we had on her medical bills. That actually helps us. You can argue that you made financial sacrifices for the marriage while she was making emotional investments elsewhere. Stuart leaned back in his chair. But we need more evidence. Phone records, hotel receipts, witness testimony. What about her job? They worked together. Workplace affairs can violate company policy, especially in regulated industries like insurance. If we can document inappropriate use of company resources, emails, phones, travel, we might be able to leverage that. Elijah left the meeting with a clear plan. Document everything, build an airtight case, and execute it all at once. No warning shots, no chances for Marla to destroy evidence or turn the narrative against him. The evidence gathering took 3 weeks. Elijah photographed credit card statements, printed phone records, and documented every late night and weekend lie. He traced Neil's car to a hotel outside town on 2 separate occasions, matching the dates to Marla's supposed work meetings. Travis helped without knowing it, mentioning when his mother received calls or seemed distracted. Ava was harder to read. She'd grown protective of Marla since the cancer diagnosis, interpreting any criticism as attacks on a survivor. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Darcy Coleman, Marla's best friend and coworker, made a mistake during a casual conversation at the grocery store. "How's Marla adjusting to everything?" Darcy asked, cornering Elijah near the produce section. "As well as can be expected. It's tough when life throws you those curveballs, but I'm glad she's finding ways to be happy again." Something in Darcy's tone caught Elijah's attention. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know. Getting back to normal, rediscovering herself. She deserves some joy after everything she's been through." "Of course she does," Darcy nodded enthusiastically. "And Neil's such a good influence. He really sees her, you know? Appreciates what she's been through." The words hung in the air between them. Darcy's face went through several expressions: realization, horror, panic. "I mean, work has been supportive. Everyone at the office. Neil included. That's all I meant." But it was too late. Darcy had just confirmed what Elijah already knew, and she'd revealed something else. She was complicit. Marla's best friend had been covering for the affair, probably providing alibis and emotional support. "I understand," Elijah said quietly. "Thanks for looking out for her." He finished his shopping and drove home, adding Darcy's inadvertent confession to his growing file of evidence. The case was nearly complete. Soon it would be time to act. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after Elijah had stood in that hospital parking lot selling his inheritance. The envelope was thin, official, devastating. Marla was 12 weeks pregnant. The baby wasn't his. Elijah sat in his truck outside the post office, staring at the genetic analysis report. According to the dates, conception had occurred in late July, during the height of Marla's supposed recovery period. While he'd been celebrating her clean scans and return to health, she'd been creating a new life with another man. The phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Marla. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." He deleted the message without responding and drove to Stewart's office. "This changes everything," the lawyer said after reviewing the DNA results. "Paternity fraud, infidelity during marriage, deception about the child's father. We can petition for immediate separation of assets and emergency custody evaluation." "What about the baby?" "Not your responsibility, legally or financially. In fact, her pregnancy by another man while married to you could be grounds for additional claims." Stewart was already pulling forms from his filing cabinet. "We can move fast on this. How soon do you want to serve papers?" "Tomorrow." That evening, Elijah cooked dinner for Eva and Travis. Marla was late again, supposedly handling a complex claim review. The kids chatted about school and work, while Elijah planned the conversation he'd have with them in the morning. "Dad, you've been quiet lately," Eva said as they cleared the table. "Is everything okay?" "We need to talk tomorrow, all of us." "About what?" "About your mother." Ava's expression shifted to defensive mode. "What about her?" "Tomorrow," Elijah repeated, "after she gets home from work." But Marla didn't come home from work. At 10:30, she sent another text. "Staying at Darcy's tonight. Claim review running long." Elijah called Darcy's house. No answer. He drove past her apartment, no cars in the driveway. Then he drove to the hotel where Neil had taken Marla before, the one with hourly rates and no questions asked. Marla's car was in the parking lot. Elijah sat in his truck for 20 minutes deciding what to do. He could knock on doors until he found them. He could call her phone and demand an explanation. He could drive home and pretend he'd never seen anything. Instead, he took pictures. The license plates, the room numbers with lights on, the timestamp on his phone's camera. Evidence for the file that was about to become a legal weapon. Then he drove home and prepared for war. The papers were served at Marla's office the next morning. Elijah had specifically requested that the process server deliver them during the morning meeting, when the entire compliance department would be present, including Neil. Marla called him at 11:15, crying, "How could you do this to me? In front of everyone I work with? The same way you could do what you've been doing to me for the past 6 months. Eli, please, we need to talk about this." I can explain. There's nothing to explain. I have recordings, photographs, phone records. I know about Neil, I know about the baby, I know about everything. The silence stretched long enough for Elijah to wonder if she'd hung up. Then she spoke again, her voice small and broken. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "The kids. Oh, God, the kids. Eva's going to hate me." "That's not my problem anymore. Please don't do this. I was scared, Eli. I thought I was going to die and I just wanted to feel alive again. It didn't mean anything. It meant everything. You threw away 20 years of marriage for someone who didn't even know you before you got sick. That's not fair." "Fair?" Elijah's voice remained calm, controlled. "I sold my father's land to pay for your treatments. I cashed out my pension, maxed out every credit card we had. I drove you to Philadelphia twice a week for 6 months, held your hand through every appointment, shaved your head when you were too weak to do it yourself. And you spent your recovery period screwing a coworker in cheap hotels." "Eli, I saved your life, Marla, and you used that life to betray me." He hung up and turned off his phone. There would be time for more conversations later, in lawyers' offices and courtrooms. But this one was finished. Eva found out that afternoon when she came home from school to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, still in her work clothes, crying into a cup of cold coffee. "Mom, what's wrong?" Marla looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Your father. He's divorcing me." "What? Why?" "Because I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake." Eva sat down across from her mother. "What kind of mistake?" The conversation lasted 2 hours. Eva cried, screamed, accused Elijah of being cruel and heartless. She packed a bag and left with Marla, moving into a hotel room that first night, then into a short-term rental apartment that Marla couldn't really afford. Travis stayed home. He'd already figured out most of the situation from context clues and his father's careful explanations. "I'm not defending what she did," Travis said that evening. "But she was really scared, Dad. Maybe if you two had talked more during her treatments." "Your mother made her choices. Now she gets to live with them." "And what about Ava? She's choosing sides because she doesn't understand what really happened." "Ava's 17. She'll figure it out." But Ava didn't figure it out, at least not in the way Elijah hoped. She threw herself into defending her mother, posting on social media about heartless husbands who abandon their wives after cancer. She organized a support group for Marla, recruiting friends and neighbors who only knew part of the story. The narrative war was just beginning. Neil was fired 3 days after the divorce papers were served. The company's investigation had uncovered a pattern of inappropriate conduct, using work resources for personal communications, falsifying expense reports to cover hotel costs, and violating ethics policies regarding relationships with colleagues. He tried calling Elijah twice, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to threatening. "Look, I know you're angry, but we need to talk about this like adults. Marla and it just happened. We didn't plan it." The second message was different. "You think you're so smart, destroying people's lives, but you don't know everything, and if you keep pushing, you might not like what pushes back." Elijah saved both messages for the restraining order application. The confrontation came on a Saturday morning in October. Elijah was working in his garage when Neil's Honda pulled into the driveway. The man who got out looked different than he had at the barbecue. Thinner, unshaven, wearing clothes that needed washing. "We need to talk," Neil said, approaching the open garage door. Elijah didn't look up from the motorcycle engine he was rebuilding. "No, we don't. You destroyed my career. I lost my job, my apartment. The company's talking about suing me for the money I spent on hotel rooms. Your choices, your consequences." "It wasn't just my choice. Marla wanted this too. She came to me." Now Elijah looked up. Neil was standing in the driveway, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, trying to look intimidating, but mostly managing to look desperate. "Get off my property. I'm not going anywhere until we settle this." "There's nothing to settle. You're a divorced, middle-aged man who thought he could steal someone else's wife while she was vulnerable. Now you're unemployed and homeless. Seems fair to me." Neil took a step forward. "You think you're some kind of sufferer here? You were cold as ice to her during those treatments. All business, no emotion. She needed someone who could see her as a woman, not just a patient. I saw her as my wife, the mother of my children, the person I'd promised to stand by in sickness and in health. Elijah set down his wrench and stood up. What did you see her as? Someone who deserved better than what she was getting at home. Someone vulnerable enough to manipulate while she was scared and sick. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. You targeted a woman who thought she was dying, convinced her that her husband didn't appreciate her, and used her fear to get what you wanted. Neil's face flushed red. You don't know anything about what we had together. I know it lasted exactly as long as it took for you to lose your job and your ability to pay for hotel rooms. The accusation hit home. Neil's expression shifted from anger to something uglier. She's pregnant with my kid. That has to count for something. It counts for child support payments you'll be making from whatever minimum wage job you can find with a termination for cause on your record. You smug fool. You think you won, but she'll never forgive you for this. Neither will your daughter. My daughter will figure out who her mother really is eventually, and when she does, she'll understand why I did what I had to do. Neil stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for Elijah to show some emotion, some crack in the calm facade. When it didn't come, he turned and walked back to his car. This isn't over, he called through the driver's side window. Yes, it is, Elijah replied, and went back to work on the motorcycle. But Neil was right about one thing. It wasn't over. The custody battle stretched through the winter. Marla's lawyer argued that Elijah was vindictive and emotionally abusive, that he'd used the divorce proceedings to punish her for seeking comfort during a traumatic period. Eva testified on her mother's behalf, describing her father as cold and distant. Travis testified for Elijah, providing a detailed account of his mother's lies and deception. The recordings from Marla's car were admitted as evidence despite her lawyer's objections. The pregnancy complicated everything. Marla was now showing obviously carrying another man's child while still legally married to Elijah. The optics were terrible, but her lawyer spun it as evidence of her client's commitment to moving forward with her life. My client made a mistake during a period of extreme emotional distress, the lawyer argued. But she's taken responsibility for that mistake and is prepared to build a new life for herself and her children. Stewart's response was surgical. The defendant didn't make a mistake. She made a series of calculated decisions to deceive her husband, commit infidelity, and defraud the marital estate. The pregnancy isn't evidence of moving forward. It's evidence of continuing the fraud right up until she was caught. The judge was a woman in her 60s who'd been handling family law cases for 20 years. She'd seen every variation of human weakness and marital failure. Her questions were pointed and practical. Mrs. Kendall, you've testified that you began this relationship because you feared you were dying, but the affair continued for several months after you received clean medical scans. Can you explain that? Marla's answer was halting, full of therapy speak about emotional healing and rediscovering herself. It sounded rehearsed and hollow in the sterile courtroom environment. Mr. Kendall, you've documented extensive financial sacrifices for your wife's medical care. Did you discuss these decisions with her before making them? Yes, Your Honor. Every major expense was discussed and agreed upon. We were partners in fighting her illness. And were you aware of any dissatisfaction on your wife's part regarding the emotional support you provided during her treatment? Elijah paused, considering the question carefully. She never expressed any complaints to me directly, but I understand from the recordings that she felt I was treating her like a patient rather than a wife. How do you respond to that characterization? I was focused on keeping her alive, Your Honor. If that came across as clinical rather than romantic, I accept that criticism. But I don't accept that it justified infidelity. The judge's decision came down in February. Elijah was awarded the house, the majority of their joint assets, and primary custody of Travis. Eva, being 17, was allowed to choose her living arrangement. She chose to stay with her mother. Marla was ordered to pay half the legal fees and received minimal alimony for 2 years. The judge's written opinion was scathing. While the court sympathizes with the emotional trauma associated with a serious illness, such trauma does not excuse deliberate deception, infidelity, or fraud upon the marital estate. The defendant's conduct demonstrates a pattern of self-serving decision-making that prioritized immediate gratification over the long-term welfare of her family. Neil, meanwhile, had found work at a used car lot in the next county. His child support obligations would kick in after the baby was born. Elijah never saw him again after that morning in the garage, but Travis occasionally reported sightings around town. A man who looked smaller each time, worn down by consequences he hadn't anticipated. Darcy was the last domino to fall. Her role as an enabler and accomplice came out during the proceedings, damaging her reputation at work and in the community. She'd lost friends, credibility, and eventually her job when the insurance company decided her judgment couldn't be trusted. The confrontation happened at the grocery store again, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Elijah was buying supplies for a camping trip with Travis when Darcy cornered him near the checkout lanes. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed, keeping her voice low but letting the venom show through. "You destroyed 3 lives because your ego couldn't handle the truth." "What truth is that?" "That you failed as a husband. Marla needed support and understanding, and you gave her medical appointments and insurance paperwork." Elijah finished scanning his items and moved to the payment terminal. "Marla needed someone to save her life. I did that. What she wanted was someone to make her feel special while she recovered. That's the difference between a husband and a boyfriend." She was scared and vulnerable, which made her a perfect target for you and Neil. "You convinced her that seeking emotional support meant cheating on her family." Darcy's face flushed. "I never told her to do anything. I just listened when she needed a friend. You enabled her. You covered for her lies, probably gave her advice on how to manage the deception. You're as responsible for destroying her marriage as Neil is." "That's not true." The phone records showed dozens of calls between you two during the affair. The hotel receipts Neil charged to his company card show you helped coordinate their meetings. You weren't just a friend providing support, you were a co-conspirator. She was my best friend. She was dying. She wasn't dying. She was in remission. And instead of encouraging her to work on her marriage, you helped her destroy it. Darcy stood there as Elijah paid for his groceries and collected his receipt. Her expression had shifted from anger to something like recognition. "You're never going to forgive any of us, are you? Forgiveness is for people who ask for it and mean it. None of you have done that. Marla asks about you. She wants to talk. Then she can call me herself. She's afraid you'll hang up on her. She should be." Elijah walked toward the exit, leaving Darcy standing among the shopping carts and checkout lanes. He'd said what needed to be said. The rest was silence. The call came on a cold morning in March, almost 2 years after that first hospital parking lot conversation with his uncle. Marla's voice was smaller than he remembered, tentative in a way that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation many times. "Eli, can we talk? We're talking, I mean in person. Please, just for a few minutes." "About what?" "About Eva. About the baby. About us." There was no us anymore, but Elijah understood what she meant. The complicated aftermath of a 20-year marriage couldn't be resolved through lawyers and court orders alone. "Well, where do you want to meet?" "The hospital, the parking lot where you used to drop me off for treatments." The location was deliberate, chosen to remind him of who they used to be. Elijah agreed anyway. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on a bench near the main entrance. The baby was visible now, a rounded belly beneath her winter coat. Her hair had grown back completely, longer than she'd worn it before the illness, but she looked older than her 40 years. "Thank you for coming," she said as he approached. Elijah remained standing. "You have 5 minutes. Ava won't talk to you. Eva's 18 now. She makes her own choices. She's angry and confused. She doesn't understand why you had to be so thorough about everything. She doesn't understand because you haven't told her the truth. You let her believe I divorced you for getting sick instead of for cheating." Marla's hands moved to her belly in a protective gesture. "The truth would destroy her image of me." "Your choices already did that. She's just not ready to admit it yet." "She thinks you're heartless. I can live with that." They sat in silence for a moment, watching cars pull in and out of the parking spaces. The hospital looked the same as it had 2 years ago, but everything else had changed. "I was wrong," Marla said finally. "About Neil, about the affair, about all of it. I was scared and I made terrible decisions." "Is that an apology?" "It's an acknowledgement. Not the same thing. I know you won't forgive me, but I need you to understand something." She turned to face him directly. "When I was sick, I felt like I was disappearing. Not just physically, but as a person. Like I was becoming nothing but a diagnosis and a treatment plan. So you found someone who made you feel like a woman again? I found someone who made me feel like I existed for something other than being saved." Elijah considered this. And now? Now I realize that being saved was worth more than being flattered. Too late for that insight. I know. Her voice was quiet. The baby, it's going to be a boy. Congratulations. Neil doesn't want anything to do with him. He signed away his parental rights last month. That's between you and him. I can't do this alone, Eli. Single mother, no support system, barely making ends meet at my new job. The new job was at a smaller insurance company, lower pay, fewer benefits. Word had gotten around about her conduct at the previous employer. Professional reputations were hard to rebuild. You should have thought about that before you decided to blow up your life. I'm asking for help. From the man whose marriage you destroyed to raise another man's child? From the father of my daughter? From someone who used to love me? Used to. Past tense. Marla's composure finally cracked. Tears started flowing. The kind of helpless crying that came from months of accumulated stress and isolation. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but Ava does. She's lost in all this, Eli. She needs her father, but she's too proud to admit it. Eva knows where I live. She's afraid you'll reject her because she chose me. I would never reject Ava. Then prove it. Help me figure out how to fix this family. There is no family to fix. There's you, there's me, and there are two kids trying to navigate the wreckage of what we used to have. It doesn't have to be wreckage. Yes, it does. Elijah stood up from the bench. You made choices that guaranteed it would be wreckage. Now you get to live in the wreckage. What about Eva? Eva will figure out who you really are eventually. When she does, she'll come home. And if she doesn't, then you'll have successfully turned our daughter against me to protect your own reputation. Congratulations on that victory. Marla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You used to be kind. I used to have reasons to be kind. So this is it? 20 years of marriage, 2 children together, and it ends with you walking away from me in a hospital parking lot? Elijah looked at her, really looked, for the first time since sitting down. She was still beautiful, still the woman he'd fallen in love with in college. But she was also the woman who'd betrayed him in the cruelest way possible, who'd used his love as a weapon against him. No, he said quietly. It ended when you decided to screw Neil Withers while I was paying for your cancer treatments. This is just me finally accepting that it's over. He walked back to his truck, leaving her on the bench with her tears and her unborn child, and the consequences of choices she couldn't undo. Ava called him that evening. Mom told me you two talked. We did. She's really struggling, Dad. I imagine she is. The baby's due in 2 months. She doesn't have anyone to help her. She has you. I'm 18. I don't know anything about babies. Neither did your mother when you were born. People figure it out. Eva was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you hate her? No, hate takes too much energy. Do you hate me? Ava. Elijah's voice softened. I could never hate you. You're my daughter. But I chose her side. You chose to support your mother during a difficult time. That shows character, even if I disagree with some of your conclusions. She says you'll never forgive her. She's probably right. What if she really changes? What if she proves she's sorry? Then she'll be a better person, and that will be good for everyone around her. But it won't change what happened between us. So you're really done? With all of us? I'm done with your mother. I'm not done with you. It feels like the same thing. It's not. Your mother chose to betray our marriage. You chose to love her anyway. Those are different things. I miss you, Dad. I miss you too. But not enough to forgive Mom. Those are separate issues, Eva. My relationship with you doesn't depend on my relationship with her. It feels like it does. Then maybe it's time to start figuring out what you want for yourself instead of what other people want from you. The conversation ended there, but it was a beginning. Eva started calling more often, tentative conversations that gradually grew longer and more personal. She was working part-time and taking classes at the community college, trying to figure out her future while managing her mother's emotional needs. The baby was born in May. Marla named him Daniel, after her father. She sent Elijah a photo via Eva, a wrinkled, red-faced infant who looked like every other newborn. There was no resemblance to Neil that Elijah could detect, which was probably for the best. Travis graduated that spring with his associate degree in mechanical engineering. He'd been accepted to Penn State for the fall, planning to study automotive design. The acceptance letter came with a partial scholarship and a manageable student loan package. I might not have been able to afford this if you hadn't divorced Mom, Travis said over dinner one evening. How do you figure? The settlement gave us more financial flexibility. Plus, I won't have to help support her and the baby. It was a cold calculation, but accurate. The divorce had simplified Travis's path to independence, even as it complicated Eva's emotional development. Summer brought a new routine. Travis worked at a local garage, saving money for college. Eva visited on weekends, gradually spending more time at the house she'd grown up in. Marla struggled with the demands of single motherhood, exhausted and overwhelmed in ways that Elijah heard about secondhand. The final confrontation came in August, on a humid Saturday, when the air conditioning in Marla's apartment had broken. Eva brought the baby to Elijah's house, seeking relief from the heat. "This is Daniel," she said, carrying the infant into the kitchen where Elijah was making lunch. The baby was 3 months old now, alert and responsive. He looked at Elijah with the unfocused curiosity of early infancy, making small sounds and moving his hands in random patterns. "He's healthy," Elijah observed. "Yeah, good reflexes, hitting all his developmental milestones." Eva adjusted her grip, supporting the baby's head with practiced ease. "Mom's having a hard time, though. I imagine she is. She barely sleeps. The baby's colicky, cries a lot at night. She's back at work but can barely afford daycare." Elijah continued making sandwiches, not responding to the implicit request for sympathy or assistance. "She's lost weight, looks tired all the time. I think she might be depressed. Postpartum depression is common. She should talk to her doctor. She can't afford counseling. The new insurance doesn't cover mental health very well. There are community resources available." Eva set the baby in the portable carrier she'd brought and sat down at the kitchen table. "You really don't care what happens to her, do you?" "I care about what happens to you. Your mother's welfare is no longer my responsibility. But it is mine. Only if you choose to make it your responsibility. She's my mother. She took care of me for 18 years. And now you're taking care of her. That's your choice." "It doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like an obligation." Elijah set a sandwich in front of Eva and sat down across from her. "You're 18 years old. You should be focusing on your own education, your own future. Instead, you're managing your mother's emotional crisis and helping raise a baby that isn't your responsibility. What else am I supposed to do? Let her fail? Let her succeed or fail on her own merits? Stop trying to fix the consequences of her choices." "That's easy for you to say. You walked away." "I didn't walk away. I was pushed away by someone who decided our marriage was less important than her feelings." Eva picked at her sandwich, not eating. "She says she would take it all back if she could." "I'm sure she would, but she can't. People deserve second chances. People deserve the consequences of their actions. Second chances are earned, not given. So what would it take for her to earn a second chance?" Elijah considered the question seriously. "Nothing she's capable of doing. Some things can't be undone, Eva. Some betrayals are permanent. That's a sad way to live. It's a realistic way to live." The baby started crying, a thin wail that filled the kitchen. Eva picked him up and began the automatic bouncing motion that parents learned through repetition. "She really loved you, you know. Still does." "No, she doesn't. She loves the security I provided, the life we built together. But she doesn't love me. If she did, she wouldn't have been able to do what she did. You don't know that. I know that love doesn't include deliberate betrayal. I know that love doesn't involve lying to your partner while they're sacrificing everything to save your life." The baby's crying intensified. Eva looked frustrated, overwhelmed. "Here," Elijah said, reaching for the infant. "Let me try." Daniel settled almost immediately in Elijah's arms, perhaps responding to the calm confidence of someone who'd raised 2 children. Elijah walked around the kitchen, maintaining the gentle motion that seemed to comfort most babies. "You're good at that," Eva observed. "Practice. Do you hate him, the baby? He's an innocent child. There's nothing to hate. But he represents what Mom did to our family. He represents what Neil did to your mother." The baby didn't choose to exist. Eva watched her father holding her half-brother, processing the complexity of a situation that defied simple emotional categories. "Would you ever consider helping? Not with Mom, but with Daniel?" "Help how?" "I don't know. Maybe letting him visit sometimes when I'm here. Being a positive male influence in his life. That's not my role, Eva. But you're good with kids. And he's going to grow up without a father figure." "He has a father." Neil chose not to be involved, but that's still Daniel's father. Neil's a coward who ran away when things got complicated. Which is what men like Neil do. Your mother should have considered that before getting pregnant by him. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Eva went to answer it, returning a moment later with Marla close behind. "I was worried when you didn't come back," Marla said, then stopped when she saw Elijah holding the baby. The three adults stood in the kitchen, connected by history and genetics and mutual damage that couldn't be repaired. Daniel continued sleeping in Elijah's arms, oblivious to the tension around him. "We need to go," Marla said finally. "Actually, we need to talk," Eva said. "All of us, about what happens next." "There is no next," Elijah said, handing the baby back to Marla. "There's just what is." "That's not good enough," Eva replied. "I'm tired of being caught in the middle of your war. I'm tired of choosing sides. I want my family back." "Your family is gone," Marla said quietly. "I destroyed it. Then we build something new." "With what foundation?" Elijah asked. "Trust, respect, love? Your mother burned all of that." "With the fact that we're still connected whether we like it or not. You're my father, she's my mother, and Daniel is my brother. Those facts don't change because you two can't stand each other." Marla adjusted her grip on the baby, looking exhausted. "Eva, honey, your father has every right to hate me. I don't expect anything from him." "But I do," Eva said. "I expect both of you to act like adults instead of wounded children. I expect you to figure out how to coexist for the sake of the people who love you both." "Love isn't enough," Elijah said. "It's all we have left." The silence stretched until Daniel started fussing again. Marla began the automatic rocking motion, but her movements were tired, mechanical. "When's the last time you slept?" Elijah asked. "I don't remember." "Ava, take your mother home. Get some rest." "What about everything we just talked about?" "We'll talk more later, when everyone's thinking clearly." But Elijah knew there wouldn't be more conversations. The positions were clear, the boundaries established. Marla had made her choices and would live with them. Ava would eventually understand the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Daniel would grow up in the aftermath of decisions made before his birth. As they prepared to leave, Marla turned back one last time. "I know you'll never forgive me," she said, "but I want you to know that I understand why, and I'm sorry. Not because I want something from you, but because you deserved better." Elijah looked at her, the mother of his children, the woman who'd shared his bed for 20 years, the person who'd chosen to destroy everything they'd built together. "Yes," he said simply. "I did." After they left, Elijah sat in his empty kitchen and thought about forgiveness. He thought about second chances and redemption and the possibility of healing. He thought about Ava's earnest belief that love could repair what betrayal had broken. Then he thought about standing in that hospital parking lot 2 years ago, selling his inheritance to save a woman who was already planning to leave him. He thought about the recordings of Marla telling Neil that her husband didn't make her feel beautiful. He thought about the DNA test that proved Daniel wasn't his son. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Not because forgiveness was impossible, but because some betrayals were too complete, too deliberate, too permanent. Marla had made her choice with full knowledge of what she was destroying. Now she would live with that choice, just as he would live with his. Elijah cleared the lunch dishes and went back to work on Travis's motorcycle. His son would be leaving for college soon, starting his own life with hard-earned independence. Ava would eventually figure out her own path, separate from her mother's emotional needs and her father's disappointment. The phone rang that evening. Ava's number appeared on the caller ID. "Dad? Mom's in the hospital. She collapsed at work. They think it's exhaustion and dehydration." "Is she okay?" "She will be, but they want to keep her overnight for observation. I'm staying with Daniel, but I don't really know what I'm doing." "Do you need help? Could you come over? Just for tonight?" Elijah looked around his quiet house, thinking about boundaries and consequences and the complicated mathematics of family loyalty. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He spent the night on Marla's couch, helping Eva with feeding schedules and diaper changes, teaching her the practical skills of infant care. They didn't talk about forgiveness or second chances or rebuilding their family. They focused on immediate needs, keeping a baby fed and comfortable, making sure Eva knew how to manage until her mother came home. At 6 in the morning, Elijah made coffee and scrambled eggs, while Eva napped on the living room floor next to Daniel's crib. When she woke up, they ate breakfast in companionable silence. "Thank you," she said finally. "You're my daughter. This is what fathers do." Is this how it's going to be? You helping with Daniel, but never talking to Mom? I don't know. Probably. That seems sad. A lot of things are sad, Eva. That doesn't make them wrong. Marla came home that afternoon with discharge papers and instructions to rest more, stress less, and consider counseling for postpartum depression. Elijah was gone by the time she arrived, leaving a note with Eva about feeding schedules and emergency contacts. The pattern continued through the fall. Eva would call when she needed help, and Elijah would provide it. Practical assistance with no emotional strings attached. He never stayed long enough to interact with Marla, never made the help contingent on forgiveness or reconciliation. Travis left for college in late August, taking with him the last reminder of the family they used to be. The house felt different without his presence, not empty, but purposefully solitary. Eva started dating someone she'd met at community college, a pre-med student named Jason who seemed steady and kind. She brought him to dinner one evening, nervous about introducing her complicated family situation. "My parents are divorced," she explained over dessert. "It's been difficult." "Most divorces are," Jason replied diplomatically. "This one was especially messy. Dad found out Mom was having an affair while she was recovering from cancer." Jason's expression shifted to something more serious. "That's tough all around." "Yeah. Dad won't forgive her. Mom can't forgive herself. I'm somewhere in the middle, trying to love them both." "What do you think about it?" Jason asked. "Not what they think, but what you think." Eva considered the question carefully. "I think my mother made terrible choices that hurt everyone who loved her. I think my father has every right to be angry and never forgive her. But I also think forgiveness might be healthier for him in the long run." "Have you told him that?" "Many times. He disagrees. Maybe he knows something about forgiveness that you don't." It was the first time anyone had suggested that Elijah's position might be wise rather than stubborn. Eva spent the rest of the evening thinking about it. The conversation with Marla happened 2 weeks later. Eva had been visiting Daniel while Marla worked, and they'd fallen into the kind of honest discussion that exhaustion sometimes enabled. "Do you think Dad will ever forgive me?" Marla asked. "Honestly, no." "Why not?" "Because you didn't just cheat on him. You used his love against him. You let him sacrifice everything to save your life, then spent your recovery betraying him. I know that. I live with it every day." "But do you really understand it? Do you understand what it must have felt like to discover that while he was cashing out his pension and selling family land to pay for your treatments, you were falling in love with someone else?" Marla was quiet for a long time. Then, "I try not to think about it from his perspective. It's too painful." "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you need to sit with that pain instead of running from it." "What good would that do?" "It might help you understand why forgiveness isn't possible and why that's okay." "How is that okay?" "Because some things are unforgivable, and pretending they're not doesn't help anyone." It was a hard conversation, but necessary. Marla cried afterward. Not the manipulative tears she'd used during the divorce proceedings, but the honest grief of someone finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd lost. Spring arrived with news that Travis had made the dean's list and landed a summer internship with Ford Motor Company. He called home twice a week, full of stories about college life and engineering projects. The distance had been good for him, allowing him to process his parents' divorce without the daily reminders of what their family had become. "How's Eva doing?" he asked during one of their conversations. "Better. She's figured out that she can love your mother without fixing her." "And the baby?" "Growing, healthy. Ava brings him by sometimes." "Do you like him?" "He's a baby. They're pretty much all the same at this age." "That's not what I meant." Elijah knew what Travis meant. "He's innocent of his parents' mistakes." "I try to remember that, but it's hard. Sometimes. You know, people at school ask about the divorce. I've been telling them the truth, which is that Mom cheated while you were paying for her cancer treatments, that you found out and divorced her, that some things can't be forgiven." "How do they react to that?" "Most people think you did the right thing. A few think you should have tried counseling or forgiveness. But when I explain the details, the timing, the deception, the pregnancy, they usually change their minds. The details matter." "Yeah, they do." The final chapter of their story played out in early summer at Ava's graduation from community college. She'd earned her associate degree in business administration and planned to transfer to a 4-year school in the fall. The ceremony was held outdoors. Families gathered on folding chairs under a tent that provided minimal protection from the June heat. Elijah arrived early and chose a seat in the back, hoping to avoid complicated interactions. Marla arrived with Daniel in a stroller, looking around nervously until she spotted Eva in the lineup of graduates. She'd lost weight since the baby's birth, and the postpartum depression had left its mark in the careful way she moved and spoke. They ended up sitting 2 rows apart, acknowledging each other with polite nods but no conversation. Daniel fussed during the speeches, drawing looks from other families that Marla tried to ignore. After the ceremony, Eva found them both and insisted on family photos. "Just this once," she said. "For the record." The photographer was a friend of Jason's, someone who understood family complications and worked efficiently to capture the necessary images. Elijah and Marla stood on either side of Eva. Daniel held between them, smiling for the camera while maintaining careful distance from each other. "That wasn't so bad," Eva said afterward. "No," Elijah agreed. "It wasn't." They walked to their cars in the fading afternoon light, the graduation ceremony marking another transition in their complicated family dynamic. Eva hugged both parents, promised to call soon, and left with Jason for a celebration dinner. Elijah was unlocking his truck when Marla approached with Daniel in her arms. "Thank you," she said, "for being here, for everything you've done to help Eva. She's my daughter." "I know, but you could have made it harder. You could have forced her to choose." "I never wanted her to choose. That was your mistake." Marla adjusted Daniel's position, the automatic movement of a mother still learning her role. "He's starting to sleep through the night." "Finally, that's good." "I've been thinking about what Eva said, about understanding your perspective instead of running from it. And I think I'm starting to understand why you can't forgive me, why you shouldn't forgive me. Enlighten me. Because forgiveness would minimize what I did. It would suggest that betraying someone who loved me enough to sacrifice everything was somehow forgivable, and it's not." Elijah studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated emotion, but Marla seemed genuinely tired, worn down by months of consequences she couldn't escape. "That's probably the most honest thing you've said since this whole mess started." "I've had time to think. Too much time, maybe." "What are you going to do with that honesty? Live with it. Raise Daniel. Try to be a better person than I was a wife. And Eva, I'm going to stop asking her to fix what I broke. She deserves her own life." They stood in the parking lot, two people who'd once shared everything and now shared only the complicated legacy of their failure. Daniel reached out toward Elijah, making the random grasping motions of a curious infant. "He likes you," Marla observed. "Kids are generally good judges of character." "What does that say about me?" "That you're his mother, and mother love is different from everything else. Even when the mother is a terrible person?" "You're not a terrible person, Marla. You're a person who made terrible choices." "Is there a difference? Ask me in 20 years. See how Daniel turns out." It was the closest thing to kindness Elijah had offered since the divorce, and Marla seemed to recognize it as such. She shifted Daniel to her other arm and extended her hand. "Goodbye, Eli." He shook her hand briefly, formally. "Take care of yourself." "I will. And Eli, I really am sorry. Not because I want anything from you, but because you deserved better than what I gave you." "I know." She walked back to her car, loading Daniel into his car seat with the practiced efficiency of single motherhood. Elijah watched her drive away, then got into his truck and headed home. The house was quiet when he arrived, filled with the particular stillness of a Saturday evening in summer. Elijah made himself dinner and ate it on the back porch, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance in the yard he no longer had to share with anyone. His phone buzzed with a text from Eva. "Thank you for today. I love you." He typed back, "Love you too. Proud of you." Another message appeared, this one from Travis. "Saw the photos on Eva's social media. You all look good together." "We look like people who care about Eva," Elijah replied. "Different thing. Maybe. But it's something. Maybe it was something. Not reconciliation or forgiveness, but acknowledgement that they were all bound together by history and genetics, and the simple fact that some connections couldn't be completely severed, even when they should be. Later that evening, Elijah sat in his garage and finished rebuilding the motorcycle engine he'd been working on for months. The machine was clean, efficient, reliable, all the things human relationships rarely manage to be. But as he tightened the final bolts and prepared to start the engine, he thought about Eva's graduation photos and Daniel's reaching hands, and Marla's exhausted honesty. He thought about Travis building his own life in college, and the possibility that their broken family might eventually become something functional. if not whole. The engine turned over on the first try, running smooth and strong. Some things could be fixed, rebuilt, made better than they were before. Others could only be accepted for what they had become. Elijah rolled the motorcycle out of the garage and into the driveway, where the evening air was thick with summer heat and the promise of storms. He'd survived the worst year of his life, protected his children as best he could, and emerged with his integrity intact. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he'd earned through his choices, just as Marla had earned hers through different choices. Some stories ended with reconciliation and healing. Others ended with acceptance and the quiet satisfaction of consequences properly distributed. He wheeled the motorcycle back into the garage, turned off the lights, and went inside to the house that was finally completely his own.